The question of the day, can you gain Spanish speaking fluency in a year? Look, the answer, and I'm going to tell you my personal story here, is yes. And I can claim that I did that, but there's a lot of detailed nuances around that, and that's what we're going to discover in today's video. The spoiler alert, I can tell you, has a lot to do with where you start and what you define as fluent. No surprises here, but I'm going to share with you my personal story of what that meant and looked like for me. So we're going to get into that today. My name is Scott Bryant. Soy el fundador, el creador del método Calistán. I created a little methodology. I did this. I achieved fluency. I commonly state, I'm guilty of making this statement, okay? And I learned a lot along the way. In fact, I created a whole approach methodology that I'm sharing with others because I quite frankly was blown away with the fact that I could do that. A year, on the surface, you hear a year, you think, oh my gosh, that's forever. How could I do that? Look, if you've studied or thought about fluency and really understand the challenges associated with, you would, a lot of people on the other hand say, oh my gosh, a year, that's not possible. That's record setting. You can't do that. You can't. So anyway, let's dig in. Agarre un palo y empieza a enterrar en el tierra. Right now. All right, so as we start our analysis of what it means to gain fluency in a year, let me define the playing field. This is super important, just to level set on what that looks like. And specifically, we're going to talk about point A, where we began, point B, where we end up, and then most importantly, how much time and effort's put into achieving the movement from A to B, okay? Now, if you're not aware, there's formal definitions of fluency and there's an official path to get there. It's defined as beginner, intermediate, advanced. There are specific levels, A1, A2. The intermediate levels are B1 and B2, and the advanced levels are C1 and C2. If you wish to find out more about that, there'll be a link to my website below, which has a paper that describes this in great detail. It's actually quite useful. And let me say this, point A, let's say starting point, cannot be absolute beginner. Absolute beginner means, let's say you have no knowledge or you're really just getting started with the language. I don't think that's possible. You got to bring something to the table. You can be in that beginner category, but not an absolute beginner. And I wasn't. Let's talk about point B. The extreme of fluency is called near native fluency. It's called C2 level. No, you're not going to get there. No way. That's really reserved for the elite that spend years and almost have the same capacity as a native, someone who it's their first language, who they were born. That is extreme, super difficult. It has all the slang and there's so much to that. You're not going to get there. So forget about these extremes, absolute beginner and near native. Nope, not going to happen. It's going to be somewhere in the middle, and I'll explain my personal situation. And then lastly, I'm not talking about somebody who dedicates themselves 8 hours a day and studies and does nothing other than learn Spanish for the better part of a year. No, that was not my case, and I don't think that's the case of anyone, really. What I'm talking about here is, can you do it as a hobby? You got a full-time job, you got responsibilities, you got things you do in life. You don't wake up thinking Spanish all day long. You spend an hour a day, something like that. You put in some time, you do it every day, and you do it 365 days. That's what I'm talking about here. But again, you're able to function as a human being and carry out your daily responsibilities. So anyway, that's the level set of the playing field. What I just find is, can you do it in a year? I started this video by stating that I achieved fluency in a year, okay? And I make that statement, and I would hold true to that. I'm going to give you a high-level overview here of what transpired for me so you can see if this might apply to you and give you some perspective. I started at what I believe is a B1 level. Again, think of A1, A2 as the beginner, tourist level kind of stuff. That's beginning level of Spanish. B1, B2 is intermediate. C1, C2 is advanced. And each of these groups, those 6 I described, they're not a finite point in time. They're a period of time, right? So you can enter the B1 level, and it's the entry of the B1 level is different than being at the point of exiting the B1 level, right? There's a period of time where you're going to stay in that B1 level before you move into the B2 level, and there's a period of time there, et cetera, et cetera. I was in what I would suggest is maybe the middle of a B1. I would call myself a middle of the road B1 level student. So what does that mean? So I had some knowledge of Spanish. I started my path a year and a half ago as an older adult. I'm very old, ancient. And so this kind of put that in context, right? Learning languages is not typically something that one does well at an older age. I'll just leave it at that. But I did bring something to the table. Where was I? I knew a lot of conjugations, verbs. I have a history. I spent 30 years ago some time in Spain trying to learn, etc. So there was something there, admittedly, but it was all very rusty, and it wasn't something I used on a daily basis. I knew most of the tenses. I could conjugate verbs. I knew fundamentally the grammatical structure, although at the surface. I recall when I got started downloading a document about the subjunctive tense and the triggers for subjunctive and what that means. I really didn't know it well. I knew it conceptually. Could I speak anything around the subjunctive? No, absolutely not. I had the knowledge. I felt like it was somewhat solid, but I had no really ability to speak or communicate anything other than very superficial dialogue. Very superficial, and then I heard something coming back and I would be lost. And I recall when I started, I was listening to a lot of podcasts to better understand Spanish speakers, which again was really weak for me. I couldn't understand it at all. But that was my starting point. Was not a beginner, but I was very much early intermediate. Now, point B, where did I get to? I got to, I would say, the entry point of C1, which is advanced. So I went to a big brushstroke, intermediate to advanced. And C1 is what we call functional fluency. It's the step before near native. But again, there's a long path of C1. But I was entering that at that point a year later, what did that mean? This was the amazing accomplishment. I could now communicate. I could have real dialogue. I could talk. I could express myself on almost anything. So I didn't have the detailed vocabulary and the richness of words, and I didn't have a handful of synonyms that I could plug in and create nuance in the way I was communicating. But all of a sudden, I had the structure and the placement. I could put the pronouns in the right place. I could use the subjunctive. I heard what others were saying, and I could understand and respond. And I could all of a sudden have dialogue that was meaningful and deeper. I could express myself. It was super cool. It was like, wow, I can do this. So essentially, I moved from here, which was maybe middle of B1 all the way through. I entered B2. I worked my way through B2 and entered C1. And I did it, again, full-time job, an hour a day, maybe something like that. I was doing it every single day, practicing. And so there you go. That's my story, what I was able to achieve in a year. I want to share with you a few of the challenges and I think things that are really important to address if you're going to go down this path. I think of three things: vocabulary, structure, and pronunciation. I think all three of these are super important elements. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, the one that most people's attention is drawn to, which is this thing called vocabulary. And it's real, it's big, it requires memorization. That is hard. So how do you memorize that level of words in a year? And you need technologies, you need tools to help with retention. I'm going to have further videos, and again, my website explains a lot of this stuff, but you need help. That is huge, super challenging. Secondly, structure and the structure of the grammar. That takes time to develop. You kind of got to rewire your brain. The order of things, the way things are saying, the subjunctive tense and structure and stuff. Spanish is more than words. It is more than words. The words have to flow properly in the right order and in the right changes and the conjugations. There's a lot there. and it has to come out, and you don't retrain your brain overnight. That's why a year is a long time, but it's necessary and sufficient to do that. And the last thing I think is pronunciation. Pronunciation actually matters. A lot of people, I think, overlook it. It's something completely different than memorization, but it's fun and different. And it is the sound. How can you possibly be fluent and speak to others if you can't sound fluent? And if you can't hear the language and decipher the difference between words in Spanish that kind of tend to flow together. They're super fast and a lot of syllables and accents. And if you don't have all that dialed in and figure that out, I'm sorry, I don't know how you can do it. Fluency? No, I don't think so. You got to pay attention to it. So anyway, those are the 3 big challenges I discovered and learned along the way that helped me to get to where I was going. So just to wrap this up, look, I share all this, and hopefully this just puts it in perspective and sets expectations. I like to say the key to happiness is low expectations. If you're going to embark on something like this, I wouldn't think too hard on what's required and how you do it, but I would actually think about the strategy and how you go about this. There's a smart way to do it, and there's not so smart ways. And if you really need to do it, it's absolutely achievable. You got to go about it the right way is my thoughts on it. So again, thanks for your time today. And don't forget our website dedicated to all things speaking Spanish, calistanmethod.com.